and welcome to the first episode of the midweek Mailbag show presented to you guys by Fantasy Points. My name is Nick Skrip. I will be your host every single Wednesday where I answer fantasy football questions week in and week out as we now are in the actual NFL season. So how it works is I'll read off either the Twitter username or the name from Discord, the question, and go through my answers and how I feel about those questions each week. So if you are seeing the show, you can either send those questions to me in Discord before this Wednesday show, or you can find the post on Twitter and in the comments sections, throw in your question to be featured on the midweek mailbag show. So again, Nick Skrip here, and the first question of the first midweek mailbag show is from @AndrewErickson_. He asks, Gabriel Davis or Allen Robinson week 1 Thursday night? Big question because it's the first game of the NFL season. Two guys that have gotten some hype this offseason. Obviously, Gabriel Davis hoping to be the wide receiver 2 for the Bills. Allen Robinson trying to have a bit of a bounce back after a down year in Chicago. So breaking this down, I think both guys want to make a statement game. It's a big statement game for both of those guys. Obviously, Gabe Davis wants to tell us that he is the number 2 for Josh Allen. And then I think Allen Robinson wants to tell us or tell himself that, hey, what happened last year in Chicago is not who I am as a player. So two guys that I think want to make a statement in this game. Both guys might benefit from coverage being focused on the wide receiver ones of those teams. Obviously, Stephon Diggs with the Bills, Cooper Kupp with the Rams. Davis last season had 5 games above 50% of the snaps. 2 of those games, he had 18-plus fantasy points. He obviously had that huge touchdown game in the playoffs that drew a lot of attention to him. I'm leaning Allen Robinson, though, because I've seen plenty of fantasy finishes out of him in weekly fantasy scores out of him to be a little bit more comfortable in this matchup. He's had 3 top 10 PPR finishes under his belt. I think he's going to command more consistent targets. Van Jefferson might be a factor, but he's banged up. Tyler Higbee isn't really a massive threat to take away too many targets from him, where Gabe Davis has Isaiah McKenzie, who I think has been a preseason darling, along with Dawson Knox, who's going to take away some red zone looks. James Cook is, a pass-catching running back they brought into this system as well. So I think a touchdown can separate these two at the end of the day, but I'm going to lean Allen Robinson because I'm more comfortable with his target share in this Rams offense. Ain't Done Yet, he asks, Darnell Mooney or Elijah Moore week 1? Kind of tugging at my heartstrings, being an Elijah Moore truther and a Chicago Bears fan. Looking at Darnell Mooney from rookie to sophomore season, he took a jump, plus 42 in targets, plus 20 in receptions, plus 424 in receiving yards, plus 127 yards after the catch, year 1 to year 2. So he had some jumps in all of those statistical categories. He also had 4 weeks above 120 receiving yards. He's the Bears wide receiver 1. He faces off against the 49ers at home. I'm going to lean Elijah Moore, though, and this is why. So it looks like Joe Flacco is the starter for week 1 with Zach Wilson banged up. Last season versus Miami, Joe Flacco was the starter for 1 game in New York. During that 1 game, Elijah Moore went 8 receptions for 11 targets for 141 receiving yards and a touchdown. So once more, that game with Joe Flacco last season, 11 targets, he caught 8 of them. He went for 141 receiving yards and a touchdown. So Baltimore, their defense last season was banged up. I will give them that. And they did add some pieces. Kyle Hamilton, for example, was a rookie they drafted out of Notre Dame, and they try to address some other areas of need on that defense. But I will also note that Baltimore last season gave up the most yards per game in the NFL through the air. So the most yards per game in the NFL last season, they averaged through the air. They gave up the most. So again, they might have been banged up. They might have added some pieces, but I still think it's important to note that they gave up a ton through the air. And now you got Joe Flacco. You can throw a revenge game narrative on him returning to Baltimore, but also you can just say, hey, he had a good connection with Elijah Moore last season in the game they played. I also think he threw a couple passes the week prior before he was the starter and found Elijah Moore for some big plays in that one as well. But Garrett Wilson, I do like him. Rookie, still learning. Flacco had a chance to connect with Elijah Moore last season. I think Baltimore is a better matchup through the air than people are giving credit for. So I'm going to lean Elijah Moore to have a big game this week. He might be one of my starts of the week. At FF Tyler O, your top tight end streaming options for week one. So I'll start kind of higher and then go down. But David Njoku is is available in 41% of sleeper leagues right now. So he's obviously not under that 50% mark that I like to look at, but I'll go, higher owned down. But David Njoku, he might be available in your league, somebody to take a look at, but he's playing the Panthers this week. I don't think David Bell or Donovan Peoples-Jones or Anthony Schwartz have clearly established their roles in this offense as, the clear number two. Jacoby Brissett, we've seen in the past with Mike Gesicki not too long ago in Miami, have a good connection. He looked to Mike Gesicki pretty often. So we have a super athletic tight end who can be the number two in his offense in terms of targets. There's that chance that he opens up the season and gets the second most targets, maybe behind Amari Cooper. So the fact that that is a possibility, I think he is a guy that we need to look at a little bit earlier than people have been rostering. We're looking at a guy that, again, is available in 41% of sleeper leagues. So maybe he's not in yours, but maybe in some deeper leagues he is. So David Njoku versus the Panthers with the opportunity to be the number two in his offense early on. Evan Ingram, 20% rostered versus the Commanders. I'm sure he wants to have a career comeback in Jacksonville after some down years in New York with the Giants. Who Trevor Lawrence is going to prefer in this offense between him and Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Marvin Jones Jr., I think that's to be determined. So not really having this clear list of this guy's going to get the most, this guy's going to get the second most. I think Evan Ingram has an opportunity to end up fighting for some consistent targets from Trevor Lawrence. So with that being said, I look at Evan Ingram, 20% rostered is a dart throw for the week against the Commanders. And then the last one on the list, I'm going to mention Austin Hooper, 30% rostered. So a little bit more than Evan Ingram versus the Giants. So throughout preseason, I've seen multiple reports saying that he has a solid connection with Ryan Tannehill through the preseason. He's had a history of fantasy success back when he was in Atlanta, some down years in Cleveland, but when he actually saw volume, he was good for the fantasy world. Is Treylon Burks ready for high volume week one? Is Robert Woods 100% himself post ACL recovery? I know we've seen him doing drills and everything like that, but is he 80% right now, or is he 100? Is he 75? I'm not sure. So I think that we can look at Hooper as a guy that could be the beneficiary early on of those two getting up to speed with Ryan Tannehill in this offense. So good connection with Ryan Tannehill. Two guys that might still need to get up to speed equals, to me, some opportunities for some targets against the Giants, which I think is more of a favorable matchup for the tight end position. So David Njoku, Evan Ingram, Austin Hooper. Next one, at Duchesne's _ Zeke or Thielen PPR. So two polarizing guys with a wide range of outcomes when it comes to Zeke or Thielen. I think the depth of the wide receiver position makes me lean Zeke. Thielen was being drafted as the wide receiver 29. So some guys that go after him are guys like Darnell Mooney, Juju Smith-Schuster, Elijah Moore, Rashad Bateman, Drake London. Those are guys that I feel like have a similar range of outcomes and a potentially could say maybe a higher ceiling. I mean, there's some young guys that could have big roles in their offense. Justin Jefferson is that dude for the Vikings. Not that we haven't seen great games out of Adam Thielen, but I think there's plenty of wide receivers that I could have taken after Thielen that might have the same sort of ceiling at the end of the day. And maybe I'm banking on some youth with some of those guys mentioned. But Zeke in 2021, he posted the lowest points per game he ever has with 14.8. He did play injured throughout that season, though. He was still top 10 in snap share with 65.9%, top 10 in rushing yards, receptions, total touchdowns, evaded tackles. So even hurt, he was still hitting those categories. So I'm not in on him being a top 12 running back, but I still think he is very useful for the running back position for redraft this coming season. Not to say Thielen won't be, but I think the further we get down the list for running backs, the less useful they'll be on our lineups. Whereas in that Thielen range, you have a wider range of guys that I could see performing around the same that he will be week in and week out. At Michael IL underscore 644, Dillon or Aiyuk or Kmet is a flex in week 1. So I'm going to go to A.J. Dillon. The Vikings gave up the 7th most rushing yards per game in 2021. It's important to note these things, I think, from last season, even if they made crazy team changes, just because, we can make changes in the offseason, but we still have to note, how things looked for them this past season. So, again, Vikings gave up the 7th most rushing yards per game. The Sleeper app said that Allen Lazard week 1, his status is TBD. Christian Watson has been sitting out. Robert Tonyan looks like he should be missing. That kind of just leaves Sammy Watkins, Romeo Dubs, and Randall Cobb. 4 weeks of 15-plus fantasy points for A.J. Dillon this past season. I think it could be a chance for a huge both Aaron Jones pass-catching day and A.J. Dillon rushing day versus the Vikings. Maybe that's, I wouldn't say it's a hot take, but I think this matchup, knowing that the pass catchers are pretty banged up and we're not really sure how things are going to look for Aaron Rodgers and whoever's available, I wouldn't be surprised if Aaron Jones has the most targets for any running back this week, just knowing that. And I also wouldn't be surprised if A.J. Dillon still gets a ton of touches and some opportunities maybe in the red zone against the Vikings in this conference divisional matchup. Last one on the list here, we got favorite DFS play. That is at FF Shane B. Favorite DFS play. So I looked on DraftKings today, and it was interesting because I'll have to look really quick. I caught one that I thought was pretty interesting, just because the range where this guy was going, it didn't make sense for the other guys that were currently being priced out to him on DraftKings. So we're looking at DFS, meaning daily fantasy, and creating a lineup on DraftKings. So this tweet got 329 likes, and that's not like a flex. It's just hey, maybe this is not going to be, not just because of me, just because people are starting to notice these things. Hey, maybe this pricing is going to change tomorrow or later today. But Chase Edmonds stood out to me on DraftKings. He is listed as 5,200 priced. That is the same exact price as Jamal Williams, the running back behind DeAndre Swift. Ronald Jones, potentially the 3rd or 4th running back for the Kansas City Chiefs right now. And Khalil Herbert, who should be behind David Montgomery. So those guys are not starters. Being priced the same as Chase Edmonds, to me, doesn't make a ton of sense. This may be the cheapest you ever get him. I am very high on Chase Edmonds for this coming season. You can say, well, it's a tough game against New England, but projecting that this running back should lead the team in touches. I know Raheem Mostert is there and he has some familiarity with Mike McDaniels, but knowing that, or projecting that Chase Edmonds should lead this team in touches, that's very different than the other guys I just mentioned in that same range. He has pass catching upside. I think Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle drawing enough attention and stretching the field at times could open up plenty for Chase Edmonds as a pass catching running back who still is going to get some work on the ground as well. So it's got some Twitter love. Maybe some other people have been noticing. So watch the price change. But if Chase Edmonds stays at that pricing, I think that's a steal because he's in like the backup range, which makes no sense to me. Same game, we got Devontae Parker, 4,800 price. Is this a revenge game versus Miami? Maybe that's a stretch of a narrative, but for a guy being drafted under 5,000, who I think has a chance to be the Patriots wide receiver 1 in fantasy, I think this again could be a guy we say, hey, this was the lowest we've seen him this season, pending health. But going back to Miami where he was last season, it's an interesting narrative right there. Kadarius Toney, keep an eye on if he suits up or not. He was priced at 4,100, and this might be, just like I said about Parker, the Giants' wide receiver 1 for fantasy. We've seen what he can do with the ball in his hands. Obviously, that explosion of a game versus the Cowboys last season. He plays the Tennessee Titans, and I really like that pricing if he suits up because I think the Giants want his role to be big for them this season. I know that They drafted Wan'Dale Robinson, who I do like a lot. Kenny Galladay is still there, jogging through, drills, not looking great. But Kadarius Toney is super interesting this year. If he's on the field and healthy, there's a lot of upside for him, and I think he might see some decent targets early on and maybe consistently throughout the season from Daniel Jones. So 4,100 for him. Jahan Dotson, who I love them as a prospect. I love his opportunity to be the wide receiver too, even with Carson Wentz for the Commanders. He plays Jacksonville. I think it's a favorable matchup. He is priced out at 3,400, so pretty low for a guy that might be his team's second option in that offense. Last one, Jameis Winston versus Atlanta. He's being priced at 5,300, which is pretty low for a quarterback. Atlanta, I think, you might say, well, they might not compete enough for Jameis Winston to have to throw the ball a lot. But I think this offense is really pushing to have a good passing game because we know they have Alvin Kamara. Michael Thomas looks like he's going to be back. They spent a first-round draft pick on Chris Olave, and they went out and grabbed Jarvis Landry. So to say, hey, let's establish a pass catching and passing offense, but let's hold Winston back some more. I don't know if that makes a ton of sense. So I could see him going out there and trying to sling it a little. And if the game gets away from the Saints, then you might have some questions. But I think that if Atlanta just pushes back a little bit, we could see a good game out of Jameis Winston, who had some good touchdown upside last season without those names of wide receivers that I just said to you there. So Jameis Winston at 5,300. But that'll be it for today's episode. Probably keep it to around 5 or 6 questions per mailbag episode. And again, if you want to have your question answered, go follow the Fantasy Points Media Group page on Twitter. I'll push out the question, hey, or the post on a Monday. Hey, give me your questions. I'll take some of those. I'll take some from Discord, and I'll try to have a variety of things so we're covering different topics. I love answering questions for people. I think a lot of people can relate to some of the information that is being asked or requested, and should be a good weekly show. So thank you guys for tuning in. Stay tuned for more Fantasy Points content, just literally nonstop. It's going to be a great season if you are a subscriber. Take care, guys.